The production possibilities curve, often abbreviated PPC, shows all the combinations of goods, of good 1 and 2, that can be produced at most, so while making full use of available resources. Produced by whom? Well, we can define this at the level of an individual worker, or at the level of a firm, or a country, and so on. So let's start by looking at individual workers or firms and see what the PPC will look like at the country level, so at the multi-producer level. Suppose that we have person A, maybe Abe, whose PPC is as shown here, meaning that Abe can produce at most 3 units of good 1, or if he doesn't make any of good 1, he can produce at most 6 units of good 2. That's A for Abe. Well, this downward sloping line shows the trade-off. The more he produces of good 1, the less he can produce good 2, and the other way around. As is often the case with these representations, it turns out that the slope is very important. The slope here takes value 2. And what it shows us is for every unit of good 1 we want to produce, suppose that we're starting from 0 units of good 1 and 6 units of good 2, in order to produce 1 unit of good 1, Abe has to stop making 2 units of good 2. So the slope, right, the rise over the run, or this full rise over the run, is how many units of good 2 Abe has to give up in order to make 1 unit of good 1. In other words, the slope is the opportunity cost of the good on the horizontal axis. Let's say we add the second consumer, Bob, and Bob's PPC is as follows. So this is Bob. For Bob, in order to make 12 units of good 1, he has to stop making 4 units of good 2, and so per unit of good 1, the cost is 1 over 3, so a third of a unit of good 2. So the slope for Bob is 1/3, and the slope for Abe was 2. Okay, then these are also the opportunity cost for each of them of producing good 1. If we have 2 producers and we compare their opportunity costs, whoever has the lower opportunity cost of a certain good is the one that we would say has a comparative advantage in the production of that good. So in this case, Bob has the comparative advantage in production of good 1, and Abe has the comparative advantage in the production of good 2. As it happens, they also have the absolute advantage in good 1 and good 2, respectively, but that's not always necessarily the case. So for example, suppose that Abe was less productive overall in both goods. Bob would have the absolute advantage for both goods, but still would only have the comparative advantage for good 1. Now the question is, what happens when we aggregate their production if Abe and Bob were to work together and we wanted to find their combined PPC? What would that look like? For this, we're going to use the principle of increasing opportunity cost. So it's easiest to start from one end, from one of the axes, and say, for example, that initially they're both just making good 2. So that joint PPC would intersect here at 10. Now, as they're starting to make good 1, who will make the first units? Well, who has the lowest opportunity cost of good 1? That's Bob. So every time Bob wants to make 3 units of good 1, he has to stop making 1 unit of good 2. That means that to go over by 3, he goes down by 1, and again, and again, and again. So the joint production possibilities curve, the initial segment over the first 12 units of good 1 will have the same slope as Bob's PPC, because that reflects Bob's trade-off rate, his opportunity cost. After that, we'll have Abe come in and start to make good 1 if they need even more. So let me trace these dotted lines just to emphasize the coordinates of this point. This is where they're making 12 units of good 1 and 6 units of good 2. So at this point, Bob is fully specialized in good 1 and Abe is fully specialized in good 2. So they each get to make only the good they're relatively better at. If we need more of good 1, then Abe is going to have to step in. He'll be able to make at most 3 units, and to do so, he'll have to stop making any of good 2. So that will bring us to 15 here. And so this slope is the slope of Abe's PPC, and it reflects his opportunity cost. Here slope is 1/3, and here the slope is 2. The slope of the PPC is always negative, so even in some cases we don't include the absolute brackets. What happens when we add more producers? Well, it's going to get a little more complicated in the graph, but the principle will remain the same, and that is, as we're producing more and more of a good, we'll go in turn through the producers that have the lowest opportunity cost of making that good. So once the person with the lowest opportunity cost of making good 1 has made as much as he or she can, then the next lowest opportunity cost person comes in, and so the slope of the PPC will get steeper and steeper as we move from the vertical axis to the intersection with the horizontal axis. If we have 2 producers, then we have 2 individual segments with 2 slopes. If we have 3 producers, we'll have 3 segments, and so on. At the economy level, where there are many firms, we won't really have discrete segments anymore. We'll want to simply draw a curved line to indicate how as more and more of a good is needed, the opportunity cost of making it increases. Again, that's the principle of increasing opportunity cost, but there's no need at that point to show individual segments. We could just show it as a continuously varying slope.